Welcome back. It's Unit 7. Let's talk about Unit 7. What we're going to learn in Unit 7. We're going to distinguish between personal and social relationships. In Part 1, we're going to describe the stages of relational interaction and the social exchange theory. So when we think about relationships and some of the stuff we've touched on just a bit in the prior lesson, we're going to carry that knowledge over into this lesson as well. So when we think about relationships, we can begin to classify key relationships we have by distinguishing between our personal and our social relationships, right? Personal relationships meet emotional, relational, and instrumental needs. They are intimate, they're close, and interdependent relationships, such as those we have with our closest friends, our partners, or immediate family. Whereas social relationships are the relationships that occasionally meet our needs and lack the closeness and interdependence of personal relationships. So when we think about social relationships, think about coworkers, maybe distant relatives, acquaintances, maybe a school friend, right? Someone that from either back in grade school, junior high, high school, or perhaps someone you've met at the college that you hang out with occasionally, but not super close, right? Some personal relationships are voluntary, especially our romantic partners, right? We have that choice. Others are involuntary, like close siblings. Likewise, social relationships are voluntary with acquaintances, and some are involuntary, like those with our neighbors or distant relatives. We're kind of stuck with those relatives, right? So let's look at, again, here we go, sorry. The kind of the chart that the book has. It talks about involuntary to voluntary, so the left-hand side will be involuntary, right-hand side's voluntary. And it talks about personal relationship versus social relationship, right? Kind of lists things out. So you can kind of look at that for a moment. Of course, our grandparents are involuntary, right? Versus our spouse. Spouse is voluntary. So when we think about the stages of relational interaction, communication is at the heart of forming our interpersonal relationships. We reach achievement in relating through everyday conversations. We talked about that in last unit, about social exchange, things of that nature. Where we talk to each other, we disclose information. It's through our communication that we adapt to the dynamic nature of our relational worlds, meaning our spaces, right, that we're going through. Given our relational partners do not enter each encounter or relationship with compatible expectations, meaning our friend from school probably doesn't necessarily want to go to a concert with us. They might not. Our grandparents definitely don't want to go to a concert with us, right? So when we think about this, and the way we have to vary the way we communicate. Communication allows us to test and be tested by potential and current relational partners. It's also through communication that we respond when someone violates or fails to meet those expectations. Remember the last unit, I talked about relationships that are either being built, maintained, or eroding, right? We do that through communication. There are 10 established stages of interaction that can help us understand how relationships come together and come apart. We'll study each stage in detail. I showed you the relationship stages earlier, but in 7.1 relationship stages, you'll find a list of the communication stages. So I'd recommend looking at it in the book because, again, I'm trying to move through the material. We should keep the following things in mind right? We want to make sure that we understand when we're talking about the model of relationship development. Relational partners do not always go through the stages sequentially, okay, not necessarily in order. We don't also experience all of the stages within a friendship or a certain relationship. And we're not always consciously moving between the stages. Also, coming together and coming apart are not inherently good or bad. As we discussed last unit, relationships are always changing. They're dynamic. This model has been most applied to romantic relationships, but most relationships follow the pattern of that. Goodness gracious, the table. I was trying to think what it was called. Table in the book. So it talks about the various stages. We're going to talk about those stages in depth. I'm not going to dwell and stay on this slide too long. We have a lot of material to cover, so we're going to move through it. The first stage, though, right at the top, initiating. The initiating stage, people size each other up, try to present themselves favorably. Whether you run into somebody in the hallway at school or at the grocery store or church, or whatever your social occasion may be, you scan the person and consider any previous knowledge you have on them. Create the expectations of the situation, and so on. All that's done almost instantaneously. When we think about that hello in the hallway, right? That's part of the initiating stage. It's also part of maintaining. We'll talk more about that in a little bit. You know, if you see somebody you just spoke to 10 minutes ago, like you're at work and you're working your shift, you saw them 10 minutes ago, and then they come back by, you're not going to say hello again. Not going to restart like it didn't happen just moments before, right? We're going to be courteous. We're going to say our hellos, and then we're going to move on. We're not going to keep saying hello throughout the course of the day. Think about also how we initiate conversations. Like within a crowded restaurant, we may elevate our voice, our volume. Versus a school library, we're going to be quiet. Experimenting, that's our next stage, but it doesn't, remember, these stages don't always work in sequential order. They're not always boop, 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 right? So the experimenting stage is, I'm trying to think of the best way to explain it. You know, the scholars that develop these relational stages, they kind of describe experimental stage where people exchange information and start to make that move from stranger to acquaintance. They call it the rituals, the sniffing ritual, like dogs do, right? Where we, or other animals do, where we are feeling out each other, kind of trying to bounce information off each other and seeing, hey, do I want to hang out with this person or not? Basic exchange of information is typical at the experimental stage. On the first day of class, you may chat with the person sitting next to you. You might take turns sharing your year in school. You might talk about your hometown. You might talk about where you live, what your major is, right? Then your natural progression of things, we might branch out and see if there are any common interests. Perhaps you're both baseball fans, right? Or you've got other hobbies in common. Maybe you like the same musical groups. Sometimes, though, in that exploration stage, we try things and they fail. They don't like baseball. They don't like the groups we like, the musical groups we like, right? Or sometimes they meet us with silence or hesitation. Now, normally we'll interpret that silence or hesitation as a lack, or that lack of communication as a sign they don't want to pursue any further interaction, and that's part of relationship checking, right? They're giving us a cue that they're not interested in talking today. Intensifying. At the intensifying stage, we indicate we would like or are open to more intimacy. Now, when I say intimacy, that means closeness, not, the other. We'll talk about the other later. when we're talking about finding closeness, meaning, are we going to move this friend a little closer? Are they going to become part of our social network? And we wait for the signals of acceptance before we proceed. This stage can take a long time, weeks, months, years, as you work from a very basic friendship, very basic acquaintance, rather, into a friendship. You know, we don't think about it. We want to explore, we want to experiment longer than we typically will take in the intimacy stage. But even in the intimacy stage, we can take years. We don't just take somebody we met and invite them to go on vacation with us. That would just be weird. Right? We're also more vulnerable in this stage. As the intensifying grows, we become more vulnerable. Now, in the intensifying stage, we can sometimes create nicknames, inside jokes, and our personal idioms. They're little stories or jokes within our friendship group. Often we'll increase our use of we and our. We'll also increase our communication about our identities and the other person's identities. This is a loosening of the typical restrictions of personal space and possessional ideas. So we will start to loosen those bonds. Then there's the integrating stage. At the integrating stage, two people's identities and personalities start to merge. They create their own interdependence with each other. While this stage is most often evident in romantic relationships, there are also elements that appear in other relationship forms. For instance, think about our family bonds. We talk about our family. We are going to go on a family reunion. We are going to go on vacation, right? So it's not just romantic relationships that go through these stages, but we do see this one really strongly represented within a romantic relationship. Some verbal and nonverbal signals from the integration stage are when social networks of two people merge. Those outside of the relationship begin to refer or treat the relational partners as if they're one person. They're a couple, right? Let's invite Olaf and Elsa to dinner tonight. Or we could just let it go. Just saying, just let it go. But the relational partners, if you got that, you got that. If you didn't, I'm sorry. Sometimes frozen, especially in this, when I'm recording this lesson, we're in the middle of an ice storm. I'm just thankful I've got power. Relational partners present themselves as one unit, right? They're a couple. When I'm hanging with my best friend, we're a team. We're just keying off each other. So, now, as a couple, my wife and I sign the holiday cards, right? We have joint bank account. We do these things. They're our dogs, our house, our cars. As people integrate, they are likely to maintain some sense of self, though, because they're going to spend time with family and friends separately, which is a balance. It's a helpful balance of their needs of independence and connection are being met while also integrating in a relationship. Now, bonding is a formal stage. It's public ritual is what we call it, right? You would think of it as a wedding, right? Commitment ceremony, maybe a civil union. This stage is exclusively applicable to romantic couples. Bonding is arbitrary and can occur at any stage of a relationship, but let's be fair, we need to move through the stages to make sure it'll work. Bonding rituals, though, don't always work, right? They can be annulled or reversed because a relationship didn't work out. Most of the time, there wasn't enough time in the experimenting or integrating stages. Bonding, though, warrants its own stage because of that symbolic act, that wedding, that civil union. And it has a real effect on how the two people communicate with each other, as well as how outsiders from that relationship communicate with us. You know. Now, I will say, if you think about the idea of the bonding ritual, think about this. We've all seen couples that start to change their social networks a bit. Especially if they're in times of marital stress or strife. If they're wanting to work on their relationship, they're going to dedicate themselves to each other more in those moments. Otherwise, they end up like over 50% of Americans and in divorce. So ultimately, remember, the bonding stage can last a lifetime. When we think about grandparents that have been married for ages, right? There's a key. Differentiating stage. The individuals have differences, right? We're not all exactly the same. Individual differences can prevent a challenge at any given stage of this interaction model. But in the differentiating stage, communicating these differences becomes a primary focus. Differentiating is the reverse of integrating, meaning instead of building, we're starting to tear down, potentially. We see this in couples struggling. We see this sometimes when a bonding spouse maybe oversteps and expects us to spend 24/7 with them. And we're not capable or wanting to do that because we've got other friends we'd like to maintain those relationships as well. Carrie may reclaim her friends as she got closer to her roommate Julie and their social networks merged. She will say something like, I'm having my friends over to the apartment and would like to have some privacy for the evening. Now, I'd like to think that roommates would be courteous to each other, but I have a stepdaughter. She's 22, and I've watched that roommate situation unfold many, many times. So we're not always as courteous as we should be. Differentiating may onset in a relationship that bonded before the individuals knew each other in enough depth and breadth. Remember the onion social penetration theory? Even in relationships where a bonding stage is less likely to be experienced, such as a friendship, unpleasant discoveries about the other person's past, personality, or values during the integrating or experimenting stage could lead to a person begin differentiating. They could have been bonded, and they may start differentiating, creating a space. Let's talk about circumcision stage. And no, I'm not talking about the act that we perform on infant boys. When we circumscribe in communication, it's a pulling back of talking about certain areas or subjects. They become restricted. They become closed off as the two individuals begin to close themselves off from each other. They may say things like, I don't want to talk about that anymore. Or you mind your business and I'll mind mine. If one person was more interested in the differentiating in a relationship, the desire to end the relationship may be starting. And this relationship may end up becoming a little more one-sided if the other person isn't picking up on these cues. You know. So think of this phrasing, and again, there's going to be some personal things that I've thrown in because we've all experienced these things. You know, one party might say, I know we've had some problems lately, but I still like being with you. But if that's met with silence, you already know that someone is checking out of that relationship, and usually not the person that said that statement, right? That said that, I know we've had some problems lately, but I still like being with you. In this stage, you'll see a lot more passive-aggressive behavior and or demand withdrawal conflict, and we'll talk more about that later on. In this stage, we also increase the boundaries and decrease communications. It becomes a standard pattern, and the relationship further deteriorates towards stagnation and possible ending. So, the next stage, stagnation, I mentioned it just a second ago. This is where a relationship ceases to grow and honestly is falling back more rapidly than it is growing. In this stage, I always call it the begin. I won't call it the beginning of the end. It's the known end is coming. It's like we can see the storm coming, and we're just standing there. We're not taking cover. We're not trying to rebuild the relationship. We're just trying to figure out what's going to cause this relationship to end. In this stage, we're going to see outward communication much more avoided. But internal communication may be more frequent, especially with the two parties involved in that relationship. They're going to be internalizing a lot of thoughts and feelings. The relational conflict flaw of mind reading starts to take place as we think with our eternal thoughts. We can read their mind, and then therefore we don't want to communicate. You'll hear phrases like, there's no need to bring this up again because I know exactly how he or she will react, right? In this stage, the stagnation stage, it can be prolonged in relationships. I have seen one of my friends' parents go through years, literally 6 years in that stage, before they finally got divorced when their last child graduated high school. You'll see that. You'll also see a stagnation phase if you watched communication with me and one of my ex-wife, right? If you, or one of my old friends that I've had to separate myself, it's very strained. It's very minimal. It doesn't mean I hate them. We just have differences, and it's in our best interest that we do not elevate a relationship, right? We can't live in the period of hate anyway, so that's neither here nor there. We'll talk more about that later. Short periods, though, of stagnation may occur right after a failed exchange in the experimental stage, right? You might be in a situation that's not easy to get out of, or the person is still there. You know, people don't like to linger in this unpleasant stage, but they may do so because it's going to be more painful to terminate their relationship. The avoiding stage, and remember, these stages don't always happen in a set order, but generally I'm giving you the order that they will fall within. The avoiding stage is a way to end the awkwardness that comes with stagnation. It basically shows that people want to close down the lines of communication. They don't want to talk anymore. We don't want to have communication. Physical avoidance is here. You change your work schedule so that you don't come in contact with that person again. In the parent-child relationship or roommate situations where parents where the kids are dependent on the parent, people engage in cognitive disassociation. They mentally shut down and ignore the other people, even though they're physically present. It's a painful stage. It's not healthy. And it leads to termination. The termination stage can happen in a variety of timelines because we talked about what can cause these situations, but we're going to talk about it more in depth. I've seen, my previous marriage was 13 years, right? And eventually, the termination stage happened pretty quick. I mean, we moved through the last 3 stages because she decided she didn't want to be with me, and I'm not going to try to I was willing to do counseling, do all these things, but when somebody's said that they want to be somewhere else where they think they might be in love with someone else, let them go, right? Terminate the relationship. Save yourself some pain. Usually, termination occurs because of outside circumstances. Okay, I just shared a little bit about one of my situations, right? It could be you terminate a friendship because you move across the country, right? And that friendship no longer meets the standards and values that you need. Termination exchanges involve typical communication elements that begin with a summary message. We've had our ups and downs over 3 years, but I'm getting ready to go to college, and I don't want to be with someone who's not willing to support me or back me as far as these things go. Or you just say, I want to be free to explore who I am because I'm going back to college. And I say this phrase because that's kind of what happened in my life. That was an exchange we had, We've grown apart was a phrase she used, and I do understand. This is a painful stage. You see the messages start to go into disassociation. People are already projecting the future. This is a phrase that was used to me. Our divorce would give you time to return to school and finish your degree, right? Really figure out who you want to be. I knew who I wanted to be. I could have went to school either way. But it's those phrasings that are used to create that negative framing and or positive framing in an effort to motivate someone to be gone. So let's talk about social exchange theory a little bit. When we think about social exchange theory, it entails a weighing of cost versus rewards in any given relationship. The rewards are outcomes that being in that relationship will benefit us in some way. What the costs are also us granting favors and or providing emotional support, and is it worth the benefits? When we feel that we don't receive the outcomes of rewards that we think we deserve, we may negatively evaluate a relationship and view ourselves as being underbenefited. Remember, in an equitable relationship, costs and rewards are balanced. This usually leads to a positive evaluation of the relationship and its satisfaction, and therefore we want to stay in it. That's social exchange theory. Commitments and interdependence are also an important part of interpersonal and psychological dimensions of a relationship, and they also relate to the social exchange theory. Interdependence refers to a relationship between a person's well-being and involvement in a particular relationship. A person will feel interdependence in a relationship when the satisfaction is high or the relationship meets important needs. The alternatives are not good, meaning the person's needs couldn't be met without this relationship. The investment in a relationship is high, meaning that resources might decrease or be lost without the relationship. I told you we seem selfish sometimes. Psychologically, man is selfish. Humanity is selfish. Now, bear this in mind. We're not keeping a little notebook with a scorecard, right? We're not being like, ooh, I'm ahead by 5 good deeds this week, and I expect some repayment. This is an overall cost versus rewards that we're keeping. We shouldn't be keeping a tally in a short-term manner. If we are, we're in a bad relationship state. We even do this, though, in communal relationships, meaning when we've got friendships, right? We measure the cost versus rewards, and we decide whether we're going to keep a friendship running. We just do these things without really a ton of thought. It's more subconscious than it is conscious, although we think about them. Now, let's jump into communication and friends. We're going to compare and contrast different types of friendship. We're going to describe the cycle of friendship and how they form, how they are maintained, and then how they can dissolve or deteriorate, right? We're going to discuss how friendships change over a lifespan. And we're going to talk about how culture and gender influence our friendships. I want you to think about Facebook or Instagram. Are the people that you're friends with on Facebook really your friends? What, if any, differences between a Facebook friend and a real-world friend are there, right? Friendships, like other relationship forms, can be divided into categories. I want you to think about, I threw my little puppies there. Friendships form over time, and they become amazing if we allow them to be, right? But think about the difference between a best friend, a good friend, and an old friend. What about work friends, school friends, friends of the family? They're all friends, right? Just remember that friendships are voluntary and interpersonal relationships between two people who are usually equals and who mutually influence each other. Friendships are distinct from romantic relationships, family relationships, and acquaintances, and are most often described as vulnerable relationships than others due to their voluntary nature, the availability of friends, and the fact that they lack social and institutional support of the relationship. So the three main categories of friendship, or expectations of friendship, we'll talk about here in a moment. A friend, I want to look at that quote, though, from Rawlings. A friend is someone you can talk to, someone you can depend on for help and emotional support, and someone you can participate in activities and have fun with. Just as that photo shows. 3 types of friendship in adulthood are reciprocal, associative, and repetitive. Reciprocal friendships are solid interpersonal relationships between people who are equals with a shared sense of loyalty and commitment to each other. Associative friendships are mutually pleasurable relationships between acquaintances or associates that, although positive, lack the commitment of a reciprocal friendship. These are friendships you might find out at a workplace or whatever, because eventually you might move from that workplace and then you're no longer friends. And then, of course, receptive friends are a different animal entirely, and they contain a status differential that makes a relationship asymmetrical. You might think of a pastor of a church or a priest. Your supervisor sometimes can become a bit of a friend, right? They're receptive friendships, but they're a little different. A mentoring friendship falls into this category as well. A workout buddy who goes to your gym, study partner for one class. Those are temporary friends, right? Receptive friendships. But once that usefulness is gone, those friendships tend to cease. Receptive friends include a status differential that makes a relationship asymmetrical. We talked about that a moment ago. A relatively new type of friendship, at least in the label, is friends with benefits, right? Let's talk about it. Friends with benefit relationships have a closeness of friendship and sexual activity of a romantic partnership without the expectations of a romantic commitment or labels. We're seeing this more and more, so that's why we're talking about it. FWB relationships are hybrids. They combine characteristics of romantic partnership and friend pairings. They create unique dynamics. Nearly 50% of college students have participated in FWB relationships, and sometimes they can grow and become something more. My wife and I are a perfect example of that. We both went through some similar experiences. We were friends in a circle of friends before that. We both went through divorces, and then we just hung out. No pressure, just hang out. Let's see what happens. Just hang out. I invited her to come to St. Louis because she needed a break from Northeast Georgia. And the rest is kind of history. Here we are. We're celebrating our 11th year together. Pretty amazing. It's a beautiful thing created out of the ashes of 2 failed relationships, right? So they can become beautiful, but don't necessarily have an expectation of an FWB relationship developing in that way. Both people would have to be open, and usually one person is open, the other one isn't, and that's what kills an FWB relationship. When we think about the lifespan of friendships, friendships, like most relationships, have a lifespan. So they're formed, they're being maintained, and they either continue to be maintained or they deteriorate and dissolve. There are also turning points that change their direct trajectory. While the developmental stages of friendship, they're not quite linear, as we talked about, but they cycle through formation, maintenance, deterioration, disillusion, and they may experience multiple stages at many different times. You can watch a friendship kind of ride the wave. Friendships are also diverse in that not all friendships develop at the same level of closeness. And the level of closeness really affects the course of a relationship. Changes in closeness can be expected over time, right? And they're an accepted part of the cycle of friendship. Less closeness doesn't necessarily lead to less satisfaction. The formation process of friendship between 2 people, moving from strangers towards acquaintances to potentially friends. Several factors influence those formation of friendships. Environmental, situational, individual, and interactional factors. Environmental factors lead us to have more day-to-day contact with people. Think about that's like residential proximity, right? Remember when we were kids, our friends had to be close by because that's the world we lived in? Or sometimes we make a friend because they live in the same residence hall at school, right? The main situational factor that may facilitate or impede a friendship formation is availability. So if people aren't available, that friendship level doesn't typically grow. As we get older, it becomes more difficult to have friends because of a hectic work schedule, family obligation, and personal stresses. Or even possibly financial problems, or even family conflict. Suddenly we can't spend time with our friends because we're working on our marriage because things have gotten to be difficult in that space, right? We're going to attend to the things we need. The number of friends we have at any given point is a situational factor that affects whether or not we are looking to add new friends. I am a perfect example of this. I stayed in the same city for my bachelor's and master's degree. I forged important friendships over those 7 years while I was in school, and then, rekindling some friendships that I had before I went back to school. All right. Now I've got 7 years here in this region. Again, I was in Georgia previous to this, but 7 years in the North Georgia mountain area. I moved to Stevens County and then eventually to downtown Gainesville. Now I find myself not seeking friendships as much because I am tending to friendships that are older friendship. I have a wonderful relationship with my wife that we spend a lot of time together because we enjoy each other's company. We have her daughter, my stepdaughter, is in school, so she has needs. We go over to see her every other weekend. And then my wife's father is in a terminal position in his life with hospice care, and we are trying to see him as much as possible. I think about previously, I used to mentor a lot more students, but I still do. But that also interferes with my ability to have new friends, make long-term friendships, because I don't have time for the upkeep. We're more likely to develop friendships with individuals we deem physically attractive, socially competent, and responsive to our needs. See, here we go again, being selfish. We're silly like that. Specifically, we're more attracted to people we deem similar or slightly above us in terms of attractiveness and competence. Physical attraction is more important in romantic relationships. We still evaluate with that lens, even in our friendships. Being socially competent and responsive in terms of empathy, emotion management, and conflict management, also self-disclosure, helps create the likelihood of a friendship development as well. Mentioned this phrase before, mentioning it again, the maintenance phase includes the most variation in terms of processes that take place, the commitment to maintenance from each other, each party, and the length of time of the phase. In short, some friendships require more maintenance in terms of time shared together and emotional support than other friendships. Some friendships can be maintained with only occasional contact, whereas other friendships we have to go out with them semi-weekly, at least once a month, right? Maintenance is important because friendships provide important opportunities for the social support that takes place in exchange for like family support or romantic relationships. Sometimes we may feel being comfortable or more open with a friend about something than we would our romantic partner or our family member, right? Most people expect that friends will be there when we're needed, and that's really the basis of friendship management, honestly, being there when we need. As with other relationships, this helps maintain relationships, but also the fact that these friendships can range from being there in a crisis to being there for everyday activities. It really depends on the two people involved in that friendship. So when we think about upkeep at the dissolution stage, the failure to perform or respond to a friendship maintenance task leads to the deterioration and eventual dissolution of friendship. Friendship cease to exist when we're not there. Causes of dissolution may be voluntary, termination due to conflict, involuntary, death of a family or friendship partner. External, increased family or work commitments, or internal, decreasing liking due to perceived lack of support. We build or maintain and relationships based on certain premises that we've talked about. While there are often multiple interconnecting causes that result in friendship dissolution, there are three primary causes of conflict in a friendship. We want to talk about that. They're generally internal or interpersonal causes. Sexual interference, failure to support, lessening of liking each other, or betrayal of trust. I don't think I really need to dive deeply into those, right? We understand those. So, failure of support from maintain a friend not coming to your aid or defense when being criticized. Betrayal of trust may stem from failure to secure private information. They tell your secrets, right? As we transition between life stages like adolescence, young adulthood, emerging adulthood, middle age, and later in life, our friendships change in many ways. Our relations begin to deepen in adolescence as we negotiate the confusion of puberty. Then, in adulthood, many people get to explore their identities and diversify the friendship circle even greater. I was blessed when I was in early adulthood. I helped manage bands in St. Louis. I met all kinds of people, all kinds of musical bands, and my circle of friends grew immensely. It allowed me to explore who I was in a safe, wonderful way before I was really too interested in too many relationships, because I wasn't keen on long-term relationship until I figured out who I was. And that's just how I was. But later in life, our lives stabilize. We begin to rely more on friendships with our romantic partner, and we continue to nurture the older friendships that have lasted through the days. Let's talk more about the adolescence phase. Adolescence, we know when it starts, we know how it works. At this time, our friendships usually are others of the same age, roughly the same grade in school, many times the same gender and or the race. Just because of what we're exposed to. All right. Most of the time, they also have similar attitudes about academics and other similar values about things. The early friendships allow us to test our interpersonal skills, and that affects our relationships we will have later in life. For example, emotional processing, empathy, self-disclosure, and conflict are a constant feature of adolescent friendships, right? And they've got to be managed and maintained. Adolescents begin to see their friends as, rather than their parents, as the provider of their social support network. Their friends help them navigate various emotional issues or concerns. So they're stepping outside the family. Friends in early adulthood, when we think about this, we think about our college age. Here we are in that space. Now some of us are older, I understand. But those who are younger in that 20s, this is the prime time of your early adulthood. You'll have the time at college to kind of look for new opportunities in your life. Try to figure out who you are. Look for the new friends. And those new choices that are presenting themselves to you in life. As we transition from adulthood or adolescence to early adulthood, we're still formulating our understanding of the relational process. But people report that their friendships are more intimate than the ones they had in adolescence, and that's normal. During this time, friends provide more feedback on the self-concept. We talk about careers. We start our careers. Romantic and sexual relationships happen, as well as our civic, social, and political sections of our lives kind of start to take hold, and we start changing our extracurricular activities. It's inevitable that young adults will lose ties to some of their friends from adolescence during that transition. My stepdaughter's going through it right now. It has positive and negative consequences, and we talk about it regularly. Hopefully you, if you're navigating this early adulthood space, you have people to talk to as well. When we think about friends in early adulthood, they help set the standards for future friendships. The old friendships are a base of comparison for our new friends. Obviously, it's a beneficial situation relative to the quality of our old friendships. If our old friendships were not healthy, using it for a standard of our new friendships is a horrible idea. Additionally, nurturing old friendships at the expense of meeting new people may impede our personal growth during this period. The largest period of time is really adulthood, and that's 30 to 65. The expiration occurs for most middle-class people in early adulthood, gives way to less opportunity for friendships once we reach adulthood, because at this point we're settling into our careers, nurturing our long-term relationships, and we probably have kids of our own. Those aspects bring more time constraints and decrease our willingness to look for more friendships. Typically, we start to narrow our social networks because we become more educated, more of a certain type of persuasion. We might be more religious at that point in time. We're definitely more set in our ways, and our friends are going to be similar to us. When we think about adulthood friendships, even though our social network narrows, adults are more likely than young adults to rely on your friends to help them process thoughts and emotions, especially those related to their partners. A person may rely on a romantic partner to help process their work relationships, and close co-workers may help process their family relationships, including their romantic relationship with their romantic partner. So there's a cycle, a circle, right? And I can attest to this. This is normal for adulthood. Work life and home life become connected in important ways, such as career, meaning money making, intersects with and supports the desires for stability, homemaking. Since home and career are the primary focuses of especially adulthood, socializing outside of those areas typically are eliminated, or limited rather, to family and older, maybe like our older friends. And then our geographically close friends. We don't reach out much. Then after adulthood relationships, we have later life friendships. Friendships in later life, think about the Golden Girls, which began in one's 60s, are generally remnants of previous friends and friendship patterns. Those who have typically had a gregarious social life will continue to associate with friends if physically and mentally able to. And those who relied primarily on their partner, family, or limited close friends will have limited but perhaps equally rewarding interactions. Friendships that extended from adulthood or earlier are often old or the best friendships that we care about as we continue to move in later life friendships. Geographic location is huge, but now with technology it's not as big. Biological aging, stereotypes, stigma associated with later life and aging began to affect, though, communication patterns, especially mobility and cognitive ability, right? Let's talk a little bit about gender and friendship. Gender influences our friendship, and it's received a lot of attention as we try to figure out the differences between men and women and their friendship. There's a general concept that men's friendships are less intimate than a woman's based on the stereotype that men do not express their emotions. In fact, most men report a similar amount of intimacy in their friendships as women, but are less likely than women to express it explicitly through saying I love you or hugging, touching, right? Guys just aren't as cool about that. But it's getting to be better. There's less and less gap there. When I think about my father's generation, those people in their 70s and 80s, they were much more closed off, much more reserved to expressing emotion. And that's because of the societal taboos about that same gender expression from back in their era, right? It's normal. However, we live in a different time. Men may use shared activities to express their way of closeness by going to ball games or competition, right? Sports. Joking, sharing resources, or teaching each other new skill sets. I find myself in that space with guy friends. I can't tell you how many I've taught how to do work on computers or help them work on their cars. So men do share a similar level of intimacy. It's just not expressed as the same way. Now, cross-gender relationships, let's talk about that idea. I still have a handful of close female friends. And I have my wife, of course, at the head of that handful. Those are older friends for the most part. Those are friends that I've had since high school or college, and we have been friends throughout it all, and none of them, other than my wife, have I had any sort of intimacy in a physical sense. We'll say it that way, okay? We've had emotional intimacy, right, but we haven't been physically intimate in a sexual relationship. So that said, I think that's one of the keys for me in my later life friendships, are keeping certain female friends in my life. I didn't consciously do that. It just sort of happened. Because I think I consciously was maybe, or unconsciously was thinking about my partner and how that could create a rift between us because you're friends with your ex or you're friends with this person you were intimate with, right? Now, Cross-gender relationships are wonderful. They are rich. They can provide so much for both people. Because think about this, I can talk to one of my female friends, about what my wife might be experiencing and get their point of view from a woman versus a man. It helps us understand how the other gender thinks. These friendships fulfill interaction that is not as commonly met as same-gender relationships, right? And some of my female friends and I, we still will compete in sports or whatever it might be, activity-oriented things like going to baseball games. All right, 7.3, family communication. There's no doubt that the definition and makeup of families is changing in the United States, right? I mean, this has been an ongoing thing. We have the most diverse family groups now than we ever had before, and I think that's a wonderful thing. So we have now part of the 2010 census, and even 2020 census for that matter, people who choose to marry are waiting longer. More couples are cohabitating before marriage. Some never get married at all. And households with more than 2 generations are back on the increase, whereas during our parents' generation, many of us didn't have our grandparents living with us, right? In our current generation, but it's becoming more and more common now in the last 10 to 15 years. Also, the overall average household size is decreasing because parents aren't having as many children. We also have same gender couples with families. This is normal behavior anymore. So we have so many more differences in a family than we used to, right? So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how families work and how family communication works in this unit. So most families usually fall within one of the following categories: structural definitions, task-oriented definitions, and transactional definitions. And we're going to talk about that in a bit. When we used to think about the structural definition of a family, it was pretty standard. I have a mother and father. All right? I might have siblings. And I think about my family. Well, right now where I'm at in my life, I have a mother and father in their 70s. I have 2 sisters and their husbands, their children, right? My nieces and nephews, a myriad of cousins, as well as my wife and stepdaughter. And I'm not putting them in a hierarchy order. I'm listing everybody in my family, right? Now, do we all live in the same house? No. But this is my family. So that's the objective, right? The structural definition. So, family of origin refers to relatives connected by blood or traditional legal bonds, such as marriage or adoption. This includes our parents, our grandparents, siblings, aunts, uncles, nieces, and nephews. Whereas family orientation refers to the people that live in the same household, connected by blood or legal bond, and they're connected together through that. Young people don't get to choose who they live with, generally speaking, right? But as we get older, we choose our spouse or partner. We may choose to have or adopt children, right? When we think about a nuclear family are 2 heterosexual married parents with 1 or more children. A binuclear family, that's what I have, is a nuclear family that was split by divorce into 2 separate households, right? One headed by the mother, one headed by the father. The original children of the family residing in each house for periods of time. My wife and I came from 2 different relationships. I have no children, but she has 1. Her child split time between her and I and her father, biological father. Single parent families, we know about those, right? Cohabitating families Now we have many more of those where the mom and dad might just be living together, no marital bonds at all. Also, we have gay and lesbian families included in this, possibly. Now, they may be married, have a civil union, whatever it might be. When we think about task-oriented definitions of family, we see all of those different types of family. We've been able to define family for so many years, but it's so many different things. And to each person, it's slightly different. But when we think about family, emotional and financial support are important indicators, right, of family. There have been cases of the custody of children being awarded to a parent or a person not biologically related to a child over blood relatives because that person acted more like a family member to the child. I think I've said this in this class, and I've certainly said it out in public. My father-in-law, who is closing in on his final days, was more of a father to me in the 11 years I've known him than my own father was in the whole course of my life. That's sad. But that's how sometimes these things work. A nurturing family member makes sure basic care and support, as well as emotional support, and even assist their children in trying to help them reach goals like education. When we think about families, the transactional definition of family focuses on communication and the subjective feelings of connection. When we think about that idea set, what we're talking about is how families connect to each other through communication, through hobby, through mutual interest, through all the participation in other life things. Family communication is our primary source of intergenerational communication, or communication between two different age groups of people. And what I mean by that, think about this. It's through family. We talk to our grandparents, right? And how drastically different in age they are. I miss talking to my grandparents. They were of the World War II. They came out of the Depression era, and they were in the World War II generation. Their view of the world was so drastically different than our view of the world today. And I think we can learn things from that. And that's why I miss them. Families also create routines and rituals. They create their own communication climate. My family comes from, it's really interesting because normally, Lucy? Sorry, my older dog decided to chew on her bone and then make herself choke. If you heard that in the background. My family were not great communicators, which is weird because here I am in this space and normally that doesn't happen. But it was because my grandparents were great communicators and took active interest in helping me in life. I think that I ended up in the space I ended up in. My parents were children should be seen but not heard generation. We did spend some time playing board games and some things like that. We went to church an awful lot. But I never saw many of the principles applied. If you're ever at a loss about family rituals, though, watch the movie National Lampoon's Family Vacation. It's a perfect example of a family bonding over an event and their family communication back and forth, with multi-generational included. And it's fun. It's kind of a funny movie. So, family traditions are more formal, occur less frequently than pattern interactions. They include our family birthdays, reunions, vacations, right? Family traditions may include a trip to a favorite restaurant, baking a cake, or hanging streamers. Family reunions, we all wear the same t-shirt, colored t-shirts, right, with the same printing on them. Or we might look to see how old people are in certain families, who's the oldest family member here type thing. Road trips, where we play on family vacation, I remember going to Colorado, where my sister and I would try to figure out, not loudly, by the way, because, again, children should be seen but not heard, we would write down license plates from all the states that we would see. And I would also put the car that it was, because I was really in tune with automobiles at that age. So I could write down the make and model, roughly the year of the car, and that way I could verify my source of the license plates from the various states we saw. When we think about family celebrations as well, we have maybe religious holidays, maybe Thanksgiving. We might celebrate the 4th of July, right? And my family used to get together on the 4th of July, so that was a big thing. Now, my wife and I have a new ritual that we've established in the last few years, where we go and see some longtime friends of hers in Florida over the 4th of July. When we think about family conversation in conformity, some families encourage self-exploration and freedom, while other families expect unity and control. I came from a unity and control family, which is weird. Again, I'm exactly the opposite. My family will express themselves through self-exploration, true communication, and true freedom. I don't feel that people thrive in the rigid family structure. Now, maybe they do, but that's my opinion. I'm not going to discount your opinion, because you're entitled to it. And I would always say, raise your children the way you think you should raise your children. If you think about understanding the difference between these two key factors of family communication, think about conversation orientation and conformity orientation. So, if we're talking about conversation orientation, we encourage, in my household here, me and my wife as the head of that household, we encouraged family members to interact and communicate with whatever they wanted to talk about. When that high conversation orientation is implied, I feel like we can grow, we can all understand each other better, and we end up with less trouble. Versus low conversation orientation, they don't interact with each other as often. Conversations were very restricted, and some thoughts never should be voiced. They're considered private, right? There's no voting about what we're going to do as a family, or there's no interaction even about what we're going to do. So think about what family conversation orientation type were you raised in, and what, if you have a family now of your own, which one are you applying now to your household? Are you high conversation orientation or low conversation orientation? When we think about conformity orientation, again, how a family communicate really sets that into standard. It's regarding, it's when we think about conformity, we're talking about beliefs, attitudes, values, and even behaviors of family. You know, conflict, we don't like conflict in any orientation, let's be real. So, families with low conformity orientation encourage diversity of belief, right? Attitudes, values. My family did not. We were high conformity. So, but I raised my, when I think about my stepdaughter, we talked about, my wife and I, we did, we wanted that high conformity where they can figure out, my stepdaughter, her daughter, could figure out what she wanted. We talked about our values, our attitudes, and our beliefs, and why we believed the way we believed, but we never discouraged a change of beliefs. And I can safely say that in presidential elections, I'm pretty sure that we voted for different people, and that's okay. I'm not always right, and you're not always wrong. There's the chances are we're both wrong many, many, many times, especially in politics. I learned that through covering them in journalism. There's the chart of the conversion, high and low conversion or conversation in conformation orientations. It was easy to say, right? Trying to get my words out. I know that we're over 1 hour now, and I've got a few more slides to go, so I need to get the point 4 section done. This is going to be about romantic relationships and communication, so I'm going to give you a moment. Let me get a drink down, because again, still not 100% over whatever went on at the start of the semester. All right. Romance has swept humans off their feet for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. And it's evidenced by countless odes written by love-struck poets, romantic novels, right? And now we have reality TV, like The Bachelor and The Bachelorette, because isn't that so romantic? But seriously, we find that people pining for love throughout the course of our lives. We do it whether it's in the pages of our diary or trying to find a soulmate from the world around us, right? Love and romance can seem to take over us at times. As we've learned, communication is a primary means where we communicate emotion, and it is how we form, maintain, and end our relationships, as we've talked about throughout this course. Now, in this section, we will explore the communicative aspects of romantic relationships, including love, sex, social networks, and cultural influences. When we think about the changes in marriage recently and the diversification in how couples are formed, I'm going to use some standards here. I'll use the following distinctions: dating, cohabitating, and partnered couples. The category for dating couples encompasses the beginning of a relationship, the courtship period, first date on, right? It could last weeks, months, years. But once a couple moves in together, they fit the cohabitating couple. Partnered couples take additional steps to verbally and ceremonially create a claim to their long-term relationship, right? That's partnered couples, meaning they go through some sort of ceremony. The romantic relationship people have before they become partnered provides important foundations for the later relationship. But how do we choose our romantic partners? What communication patterns affect these relationships, causing them to come together and fall apart? Well, let's cover it. Let's talk about relationship formation and maintenance. When we think about family backgrounds, values, physical attractiveness, and communication styles, those are just some of the factors that influence our selection of romantic relationships, right? The attachment theory, as discussed earlier, relates to the bond that a child feels with their primary caregiver. Research shows that the attachment style, secure, anxious, or avoidant, formed in childhood influences romantic relationships. For those who remember, I said we would be coming back to that, and here we are. Other research shows that adolescents who feel like they have a reliable relationship with their parents feel more connected and attraction in their adult romantic relationships, meaning they're going to be feeling good about things. Aside from attachment, which stems from individual experiences like as a child, our relationship values, which stem more from societal norms and expectations, also affect our ability in romantic attraction. So we can see that the important influence of communication really has on the overall of relationships, including our romantic ones. Over the course of the 20th century, for example, preference for chastity was a valued part of a relationship. Prior to that, in the 20th century, we started to devalue that, right? We decreased its value. We kind of moved away from chastity being an important part of starting a relationship with someone, romantic relationship with someone. We got away from that. While partners or people used to indicate it was very important that the person they partner with not have any previous sexual partners, nowadays that's not even a thing, really. People list several characteristics they view much more important in mate selection. In addition, characteristics like income, ability to bear and create children, and cooking and housekeeping skills were once highly rated as a potential mate, right? Nowadays, do we really think about that much? Today, we're into mutual attraction and love. When we think about relationship formation and maintenance, in terms of mutual attraction, over the past 60 years, men and women have more frequently reported that physical attraction is an important aspect of mate selection. But what characteristics lead to physical attraction? Despite saying that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, because it is, are there certain standards that we can apply across the board, right? There's been a lot of research that indicate body and facial symmetry are universal basics of judging attractiveness. Further, the matching hypothesis states that people with similar levels of attractiveness will pair together, despite the fact that people might idealize fitness models or celebrities as being extremely attractive. In other words, if I'm an 8 on a 1 to 10 scale, which I don't think I am, but anyway, if I was, I would find my wife who would be about an 8 too, right? We would be in a similar space. What's crazy is that does apply through many, many couples today. Other research has shown verbal and nonverbal expressiveness are judged as attractive. That's helped me out a bunch, by the way. I can score a little higher because of that. Meaning that person's ability to communicate in an engaging, dynamic way may be able to supplement for some lack of physical attractiveness. In order for a relationship to be successful, people must be able to function with each other on a day-to-day basis. And once the initial attraction phase is over, we've got to be able to communicate, right? Also, we're going to find similarity in fun activities and hobbies has to be there as well. So we might want to go to sporting events, or our relaxation activities will be similar. Our television and movie taste might be similar, maybe even our music taste. So all of those play a factor in romantic relationships. Although romantic love is considered a precursor to marriage in Western societies, it's not the case in other cultures. Think about the arranged marriage situation where you have countries like China, India, Iran. That's what family members already decided who you're marrying way before love could ever come into play. Now, what's interesting is research on marital satisfaction of people in autonomous, which is self-chosen marriages, versus arranged marriages, have been mixed. But there's no significant difference in marital satisfaction between either of those. And both of them have similar fail rates. In fact, arranged marriages fail a little less frequently, but you could say, well, that could be due to cultural constraints. Okay? Love and sexuality and romantic relationships. When we think about romantic relationships, we think about love. However, love did not need to be a part of a relationship for it to lead to marriage until fairly recently. Think about it. Even when we think about people in royalty, they tended to marry because of social status, similar power structures, what the other spouse could bring to the table to help the country from which that person was from. So love hasn't always been essential in romantic relationships in a traditional sense of, oh, I have to fall in love with you first to marry you. That said, I'm not discounting that it's not an important part. In fact, passionate love entails an emotionally charged engagement between two people that can be both exhilarating and painful. For example, the thrill of falling in love with someone can be exhilarating, but that vulnerability or anxiety that comes with love can be, and the fact that it might not be reciprocated, can be ultimately painful, right? Companion love is an effect felt between two people whose lives are independent. Romantic partners may come to find a stable and consistent love in their shared time and activities together. That's normal for a loving relationship. The idea behind this distinction that relationships are based primarily on passionate love will terminate unless the passion cools over time into a more enduring and stable companion love. And this doesn't mean passion must die out completely. I still love my wife. She's still amazingly, she's the thing I desire most in life, probably. Honestly, I haven't stopped to think about it. I'm not big on money. I choose her every day. You guys saw the text message I sent. I choose her every day because I do. I want that. So the passion's still there. But we've kind of moved more into that companionate love where, yes, we're intimate. Yes, we have passion. But we also know the day to day. We're exhausted. We're in our 50s. We're exhausted sometimes, especially with her father in his medical state. A daughter in college. Think about that. It gets tiring, right? And I work full-time plus teach. Remember, the lack of passion could lead to boredom and dissatisfaction. But many people enjoy the thrill of occasional passion in their relationship, but may take solace in the security of love that is much more stable. While compassionate love can exist in close relationships with friends and family members, passionate love is tied to the sexuality present in romantic relationships. There are many ways in which sexuality relates to romantic relationships and many opinions about the role that it plays within relationships. Ultimately, it's really a personal preference. If a person finds out that a romantic interest has more extensive sexual history than their own, they may not feel compatible, and that could lessen the attraction. Or they could be relishing in the fact that they're going to be with someone so experienced, right? It's personal. Sexual activity often strengthens emotional bonds between romantic couples. It's clear that a romantic couple's emotional bonds can form in the absence of sexual activity, right? When we think about our grandparents, I'd rather not think about them engaging in those activities, but they still love each other, right? Also, think about sexual communication. We got to talk about the likes, dislikes, and or refusal or engagement in an activity, right? We have to be on the same page, otherwise that would be disastrous and cause us to regress in a relationship. We could be tearing down a relationship because of it. Social networks also influence our relationships. Romantic relationships are not separate from interpersonal communication or connections with family and friends, right? So many times you'll find couples share family and friends or balance them, right? That's normal behavior. The book had a wonderful chart on how all are interconnected. Dan and Bernadette are together. Corey and Charisse are together. But they all hang out. They're part of a social network, right? They all talk to each other and they all interconnect. That network overlap creates structural and interpersonal elements that affect relational outcomes. If one couple suffers a divorce, then it's more likely the other couple may have problems as well, unless they communicate. This is where empathetic listening and validation in times of conflict come into play, right? We've got to communicate. In addition to providing a supporting structure, shared associations help create and sustain a positive relationship culture. For example, mutual friends of a couple may help validate the relationship by talking about how cute they are as a couple, what a wonderful couple they are together, right? And then they sometimes might talk about the couple separately as well. Being in the company of mutual friends creates a positive feeling between the couple as well, and it helps allow us to be with people that we're somewhat like, but also somewhat different from. And that interdependence kind of helps create an extra bond between couples, married couples, you'll see. We talk about interdependence. There's the interdependence of it. We're almost to the end, and I really want to wrap this up because we're in 1 minute and 25. Oh, I said 1 minute. Goodness gracious. 1 hour and 25 minutes. You can look at that more in depth, but again, I'm not going to ask anything about that. But it talks about partnerships in the triad of activity and how they're interconnected. All the corners do interact with each other ultimately, and they are important. They can create a support network. They can help us in a relationship. They can also hurt us. We all know people that cheated on somebody with someone within their circle of friends or whatnot, right? So let's be aware of that as well. Communication is the key in any relationship, especially our romantic ones. Please complete this Chapter 7 exercise. It's also listed in our work. Thank you so much. Have a good day, and I'll see you in Chapter 8.